There is a story that I know. It's about the Earth and how it floats in space on the back of a turtle. I've heard this story many times, and each time someone tells this story, it changes. Sometimes the change is simple, the voice of the storyteller, for example. Sometimes the change is in the details. But in all the tellings of all the tellers, the world never leaves the turtle's back, and the turtle never swims away. One time, a child in the audience asked about the turtle and the earth. If the earth was on the back of a turtle, what's below the turtle? Another turtle, the storyteller told the child. And below that turtle, another turtle. And below that, why, another turtle. The child began to laugh, enjoying the game, I imagine. So, how many turtles are there? The storyteller shrugged. No one knows for sure, he said, but it's turtles all the way down. Some of you may remember this story, me telling it. I borrowed it from the 2003 book, The Truth About Stories. Out of the couple hundred books that I acquired during seminary, this one, written by Native American writer and activist Thomas King, remains one of my favorites. King opens each chapter with some version of the turtle story. Each chapter then goes on to talk about something different, about life, growing up in Canada, philosophy, culture. His repetition of this little story, though, is like a bookend, a scaffold, a frame for every story that he then goes on to tell. For me, it was like underlining a favorite passage. There was something special about to happen, something powerful I needed to remember, something about the story that I was just supposed to know. And it wasn't necessarily the details. It was that the story, the act of storytelling, and the storyteller, it's all linked. In fact, in some way, they're all the same kind of thing. Something magical and timeless, something true. King put it this way. He said, "The truth about stories is that's all we are." In this light, we have been blessed this morning to consider the case of Aesop. The truth is, we know very little about who this person was, nothing for certain, not where he lived, not what he did during his life. But what we do know is that he collected stories, hundreds of them. Many of Aesop's fables warn against arrogance or remind us that wisdom often comes from unexpected places. They call us to recognize that we are part of something larger than ourselves. Many play on the theme of humility, and this is good, because while I'm perfect, humility is something you people clearly need to work on. And that's why today is such a wonderful opportunity for you. The point is that stories, both ancient and modern, have a lot of things to teach us, but only if we're willing to listen. And we should, because these lessons are timeless. They are relevant to how we navigate the present and how we might shape the future. Consider the mule. Here we learn that daydreams of a golden yesterday don't really exempt you from the realities of life. You may want something different, and if you do, you're going to have to do something different. How about the tortoise and the hare? Against all expectation, the tortoise beats that hare in a foot race. Why? Because the hare is foolish and arrogant. The lesson, you could take, talent alone is not going to save the day. In the lion and the mouse, just as in the dove and the ant, we learn that acts of kindness create networks of resilience, networks that are necessary for survival. We're in this together. In the north wind and the sun, victory does not go to the foolish, the blustery, or the headstrong. Instead, we learn that patience, softness, persistence can and does change the world. Each of these stories gets offered up as a challenge to question what you think you know, a challenge that asks you if it's your beliefs or your attitude or your expectations that keep the world just the way it is and keeps you lonely, low, and lost. Fables, myths, legends, epics, these stories poke holes in our pride and our certainty. They remind us that those who start with all the answers are often the ones whose row is hardest to hoe. What they say to us again and again is that wisdom comes from recognizing our limitations, staying open to the invitation to growth, and listening to those voices that might otherwise be overlooked. As Unitarian Universalists, we do not affirm the importance of humility, not especially. It's not in our old 7 principles and 6 sources, nor is it explicitly listed out in our new 6 shared values. But I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to read it into our beliefs, however. Our tradition calls us to embrace a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The emphasis is on the search, though, not on the finding. And in that search, in any good search, the first and most reliable step is a willingness to admit that our perspectives may be limited, that wisdom might come from a source unexpected, that we might not already have the answer. That's humility. But perhaps this work is work that we need to do a bit more explicitly, because humility is more than a personal virtue. It's a necessary ingredient when creating communities, and that is in part why I say out loud every Sunday morning, we do not have all the answers. But this acknowledgement only works if we're willing to hear and accept the challenge in the not knowing, if we're willing to listen and learn. Aesop taught that this was true in ancient Greece, and I would argue it's just as true in today's America. My entire life, there have been family, friends, and neighbors who have told the story that racism is a thing of the past, that justice was alive and well, and that the system was equal and fair for all. Black Lives Matter challenged that story. BLM insisted that we listen to the voices we have ignored and that we were to rewrite and reimagine what justice and equality and inclusion really mean. That story is still unfolding in our world. Here's another. For too long, too many have said that boys will be boys, that sexual harassment and violence are isolated incidents, that women just need to go along to get along. Me Too blew up that by centering and amplifying the voices and the stories of violence survivors. Me Too demonstrated conclusively that harassment and abuse and gaslighting were not just mysterious anecdotes, but patterns woven into our culture. And Me Too has demanded accountability, consequences, and necessary change. BLM, Me Too, these are transformative stories, and telling them has made this a different nation. And in that spirit, let's take a few minutes and talk about the Super Bowl halftime show. If you missed the game entirely, you may probably still know that it featured rapper Kendrick Lamar. What you may also have heard was that, quote, Lamar is a nobody who got the gig as a diversity hire and couldn't sell his Compton swagger, end quote. That's something the Rolling Stone lifted from social media. They reported some other comments, like one from former Congressman and accused rapist Matthew Gaetz, who said, quote, "The halftime show you just watched is clearly the regime's response to Trump's historic gains with black men. Just to be clear, given that the GOP is in control of all three branches of government, no one knows what Gaetz meant by the word regime in that tweet." Look, it doesn't really matter if you're a fan of Kendrick Lamar or rap music, or even if you're a fan of the Super Bowl or Super Bowl advertisements. But these comments, as they come, are as tired as they are predictable. And I say that while freely admitting that much of the political theater that unfolded during the halftime show sailed right over my own white privileged head. For example, I didn't personally notice that there were no white dancers anywhere on the field. But with Trump canceling every DEI initiative he can, even I can get that conspicuous absence was probably the point. I also had no idea why Samuel Jackson was narrating, at least not at first, or why Jackson, a black man, was telling another black man that his music was, quote, too ghetto. That felt weird for me. But then I did realize that Jackson, dressed like Uncle Sam, was talking like Uncle Tom. That hurt. That was an ouch. Getting back to the dancers, I saw them in their red, white, and blue costumes dancing in the pattern of an American flag. But I admit, I missed the symbolism of the dancers when they were all hunched over, as if they were showing us the very backs of those ancestors forced to build and carry the nation that this flag represents. I also didn't get it when the dancers separated down the middle as if the flag was being torn in half, like the divided nation we now are. I knew about Trump's offer to depopulate parts of the Middle East, but I completely missed it when the NFL security team tackled and forcibly removed a dancer who was waving a Palestinian flag. I didn't get why Za was singing in a red outfit or why Serena Williams was dancing in a blue one. And maybe that's because I completely missed the Crips and Bloods gang references. Just like I missed that part of the dance stage that was made up to look like a prison yard. I heard when Samuel L. Jackson asked the rapper if he knew, quote, what game he was playing. But the camera angles on my TV meant that I couldn't see the clusters of dancers in their colored uniforms arranged on the field so that it looked like a PlayStation controller. Or maybe those symbols meant something else. They were perhaps lifted from that TV show, Squid Game, where the impoverished play games of life and death for the entertainment of the obscenely wealthy. Either interpretation would explain the giant game over message shining from the crowd at the end of the show. And all of that happened while Lamar was calling out fellow rapper Drake for Drake's treatment of women, especially female children. You can go look that up after today's service. For me and for many white viewers, the performance was entertaining but confusing. For black audiences, however, it was a powerful story told in movement and music in front of the largest crowd imaginable, a commentary that exposed the divisions in our nation and the histories of the oppressed that often go unseen by those complicit in that oppression. I didn't get it then. I think I get it now. And speaking personally, I think it's awesome. And the fact that all of that unfolded right under the nose of a would-be fascist who spent millions of taxpayer dollars just so he could wave at the crowds after his own team spent a week firing thousands of federal aid workers in order to save money made that whole show as ironic as it was iconic. But here's the point I want to leave you with. Cultural movements and cultural moments, they're invitations to change and to humility. to step back from what we think we know and listen to perspectives that may challenge us, to acknowledge that the world we assumed was fair or just or safe for all may not be, and to understand that if that is true, the invitation becomes an obligation to change the world, to do the work of bending the arc of history ourselves. When we center the stories of other people, big or small, we build resilience into our social networks. When we stretch to understand the fundamental truth that no single perspective is ever the whole truth, we create space for compassion, for growth, and for transformation, not simply by repeating the old tales of how things used to be, but instead by imagining something new. Aesop's fables have lasted for almost 3,000 years, not because they tell us what to think, but because they invite us to think, to question, to grow. And whatever you think of rap music, Kendrick Lamar's performance on Sunday was the same kind of invitation. My friends, February is Black History Month, a time when we are particularly called to listen to and learn from the stories told by Black Americans, both past and present. In the days and weeks to come, may we, too, accept the invitations that we have been given. May we embrace humility, not just as individuals, but as communities and as a people. May we recognize that the stories we tell matter. How we tell them, where we tell them, matters. May we always have the courage to tell the old stories and write the new ones. Stories of justice, stories of possibility, stories of a world redeemed and transformed. And tell them to the face of oppression, hate, and fear, or maybe right under its nose. It's turtles all the way down, my friends. Because the truth about stories, that's all we are. Amen.
Visit us at UUSG.org.